This is very much a question for Irvine. The millennials did not invent political correctness, but they have brought cancel culture into being. Is this aberrant immaturity, self-righteous hostility, or a progressive social dynamic?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think in some ways that, it's both that kind of aspire. There's two sides of this whole thing. If you accept that the world that we live in and the legacy and history of imperialism and colonialism is discriminated against large swathes of people, and it's also prescribed a kind of identity to us, which a lot of people find restrictive, then you think, well, this is a modern age attempt to redesign the world that we live in, basically. Now, against that, it's also a very... when you have a kind of neoliberal economic order, when the economics can't be contested, if you look at what's happened in Britain and America in the last 40 years, all the money has gone from the citizens through this political structure into the...
massive wealth gap.
But into these kind of multinationals, those offshore accounts, into a very small number of people. And this machine goes on and on. So people can't contest the economic sphere. So what they've done now is they've moved into the cultural sphere. And a lot of it is to do with the technology and the fact that you have these kind of arguments online, these culture wars that nobody can really win. People are just kind of shouting at each other, and the object is to cancel someone. That's the kind of is to get somebody cancelled, because that gives people the vindication that we come out with all this nonsense that we're on the right side of history, you're on the wrong side of history. There's a whole kind of self-righteous self-justifying kind of politics that goes along with it. And it's everybody, from kind of rich, entitled, wealthy white men to the most discriminated against lower class people, the representatives, all feel very angry and very powerless. And these culture wars are a result of that anger and powerlessness. And the anger and powerlessness is a result of not really having any input into what happens to us financially and economically. So we're basically having this war, and it suits the very powerful people in our global society, because when we're arguing with each other and fighting with each other, we're not looking at what they're up to.
Carolyn, I could see you nodding there. It sounds like a war with no winners and no end. What do you make of this age?
I think particularly that last point was a really good point. And I think, I think if people actually sit down and flesh out issues and actually talk about the substance, of the point that I made earlier, have that more mature debate, tease out the issues. Just because someone disagrees with you on something doesn't mean that they're a bad person because they don't agree with you. It's trying to just find that ground that, you can talk about things, everyone's point is valid, and that's okay. And
Can we do that, though, sorry, on social media? What impact does social media...
No, we're not very good at it on social... Well, the problem with social media is it becomes that pack mentality.
But you must experience...
Oh, yeah.
coming on the program probably...
Yeah. Well, I've been abused all day on Twitter, so I just don't even look at it, and I just don't... And after a while, when you've been in the public sphere enough... for me, it just goes over the top. It doesn't bother me, because ultimately... who are a lot of these trolls? They're nameless, faceless people, and if they're not going to put their name to what they're going to say, well, I'm not going to give it any credence. But it is incredibly vicious, and we do see it happen where people become deplatformed and basically unpersoned because they have a view that is different to whatever is the kind of passing fashion. And I think we need to be really careful, because then you've got people who stop saying what they actually think. You stop having good, substantive, interesting debates, and ultimately when more people work together or have a better conversation about something, you actually end up with a better outcome. If you stop debate, then you actually end up, I think, overall with a poorer outcome.
So economists like me tend to think that culture comes from technology. And for me, I look at that period, 2006-2008, where the smartphone and a whole bunch of social media platforms emerge. And in the period since then, you've seen a substantial worsening of youth mental health, particularly for girls. Self-harm is up and a whole range of indicators of stress for young people are up. As the dad of teenagers, I worry that often they don't have enough space to make the mistakes that all of us on the panel got to make outside the eye of the smartphone and social media. And none of us would want our worst moments to be put up on the internet, but often that's what these platforms are driving. And unless we get a better control over the platforms as a society, I think they're going to make it very hard to have the kinds of quality discussions that we need as a society. They're also going to increasingly put stress onto young Australians who need to be able to operate without a device which is designed by people using some of the best psychological insights in the world to hook them, keep them on the platform, keep them doom scrolling and keep them away from those wonderful face-to-face interactions. So now you've got a backseat generation of kids who are less likely to have part-time jobs, less likely to be dating, less likely to be out playing active sports and more likely to be doom scrolling. For me as a parent and also as a policymaker, it's my number one concern right now.
We've got a question in a minute just directed directly to Jacqui, but I want to come back to you, Irvine, just to round this out. Are there some things that deserve to be cancelled or some things that are invalid? And how do you, as a creative person, operate in a space where the stakes can be so high?
I think it's, we have to accept that, the world is changing and it's changing very quickly. And I think, there's a need to kind of keep up with all these developments and changes. I mean, I wrote a book, my last book was, there's a lot of trans characters in it. And what happened was that for the first time I had a trans reader that the publisher said, no, you have to run this past a trans reader. And I was completely opposed to this. I thought, this is censorship, this is terrible, this is, and I was really kind of angry and annoyed about it. But when I worked with the trans reader, it was one of the best experiences that I had because it was actually, it was a very helpful thing, and the trans reader had this idea that they were supportive of the book and broadly supportive of the characterizations, and they wanted to make the book better, and they could see what I was trying to do. So it was actually a very kind of positive and uplifting experience. But I was coming to it from a position of ignorance that this was only about censorship. It wasn't about a kind of helping process. It would enable something to get better. It would enable me to move out of my own kind of sort of narrow kind of cultural prejudices and assumptions. So it was a very good experience. But again, I think that this is all very new. This whole thing is very new to the people that are participating in it as well. And it's also in a time where we're talking about youth feeling very depowered and feeling that they have to sort of, they don't really have anything in their life that they feel they can control. We live in a media society rather than a street society where these things were negotiated in peer groups, and now it's very hierarchical. It's top down. The Instagram influencer will tell people what to think and how to feel, and if you don't fit into that, it can be a terrible thing. And so I think we have to try, and it's not easy. And I'm not always kind of particularly brilliant at this, but we have to try and be tolerant of people in this great period of change, because we're all becoming untethered with deindustrialisation. We're becoming untethered to these things that gave our lives meaning.